give a thank you to the professors who are here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for continuing to support us in this community of practice that we're trying to build. Today's session is going to focus pretty exclusively on discussion-based learning and how we can implement that within an online modality, right? I'm sure everyone here is pretty familiar with discussion boards as a tab within Blackboard, but there's a lot of different ways to approach discussion-based learning that's not necessarily right through that tab. Now, I did share a research article, and I want to apologize because I had read through this research article and then read the conclusion and was like, not really worthwhile. Their conclusion just essentially said it's really hard to measure learning outcomes through discussions, but we tried. So I want to apologize, but at least it gives a look. This research article was based from Israel, so it kind of gives us a look of what other countries are doing when it comes to online learning. At least it gave us that introspective look, or broader view of online learning in the world.
It's good to have that because I didn't read it before this session, but I am going to go back through these materials. So even with your forewarning, I will.
Thank you.
Go ahead and read it.
Perfect. and one thing that I did capture from this research article that I think is a good theme to base this foundation of this discussion is going to be the community, right? What's the point of discussion boards? Is it for a grade? Is it for points? I kind of want to change that framework. A discussion board or discussion question should be to create a community, to create a discussion, to have a debate, to make us uncomfortable because someone's taking a different path than we are or a different viewpoint than we are. It shouldn't be one right answer, right? It should be ambiguous. Funny enough, apparently, to kind of enlighten you all on what's going on in the greater university sphere, the provost has tasked one of our academic units or one of our units on campus connected to IT to start implementing discussion-based learning in face-to-face classrooms. So the basis of all this comes from the Harkness method. Specifically, the Harkness method comes from a pretty reputable boarding school. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, Philip Exeter Academy. And they pretty much originated this sort of methodology, but if you have any background in religion, you probably know that the Quakers were also very well known to have sort of this discussion dialogue style of learning, so I don't want to just credit this one academy to creating something that was also done before.
Right now they're at the center of Harvard's legal dispute. Do you know that? Because
this academy?
Well, they're not at the center, but they're involved because Harvard, there's a lawsuit by Asian Americans that Harvard has discriminated against, and Harvard is now having, this is distracting you, but in case you want to, Harvard has had to generate a lot of data about their admissions, and what was discovered, not surprisingly, is that there's a small set of schools, including Phillips Exeter and a number of others, who virtually have a subset of places for admission at Harvard. And the question is, Harvard has a defense of it, but these are extraordinary prep schools, as you know, up on the East Coast.
Yes.
And a disproportionate number of those students have got admission to Harvard. And many of them do it on merits, but the question is, are they over-favoring? Phillips Exeter is one, and there's a couple of other. There's a subset of the most exclusive Northeastern schools, which do give a phenomenal education. But their question is, some of the kids are what they call legacy applicants, and so that gets controversial.
And this still sticks to the theme because it's a great discussion, right? We can have a great talk about admissions and elitism and things of that nature. But I do love that UM, I think, does a pretty good job at providing access to a lot of students, and especially the Miami community as a whole. And a lot of first-generation students here sometimes, and especially with the BGS program, if you're teaching adult learners, some of who might be the first in their family to graduate college. And this method, and probably what Harvard values, is it causes the students to critically analyze and critically think. It's not you, the professor, is the end-all, be-all of knowledge. Students know that they have to contribute to the world of knowledge as well, regardless of the topic. And so there is a provost initiative to try to implement this sort of methodology within our face-to-face classrooms. What's not being discussed, and what I want to have the conversation of, is how can we have this same approach within the online modality? How can we provide that sort of environment where we're allowing students to add to knowledge, not just regurgitate knowledge. So fascinating academy, and I did get some tidbits of information from looking at the website. One was this particular quote that I want to share with you. It begins with a question, a moment of anticipation and contemplation. Then together we lead each other to places we never could have imagined. I do not want to question the merits of a PhD and what it's done and your expertise, but we all know that knowledge evolves, right? It doesn't stay stagnant, it doesn't stay in one place, it keeps growing. People keep adding their story into it. And I think this is the way we need to look at discussion board questions. Are students able to draw on their own experiences from the question to answer the question? Are they able to take a stance from one place to another to get there, to answer that question, to address that question? So those are the things I think me and my colleagues were going to kind of talk about a little bit at length. Ariella is going to talk about different ways to think about how you ask questions and what sort of thinking you're creating when you're doing that. And then of course Ron is actually going to show some examples of some video-based discussion boards that are currently being utilized in some of the BGS courses, and maybe that inspire you to create your own video-based discussion board questions.
I have one question, and you don't have to answer it now, you can answer it at any point. I have sometimes wondered whether a student who is either constrained by time doesn't take a quick look at what other people are saying and then try to come up with something. Yes. I've just wondered.
No, absolutely, and I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. That's a fantastic question. Ron's actually going to talk about a feature within Blackboard that we've implemented in some courses that forces students they have to post before they see anybody else's post.
Okay.
So kind of they have to contribute, right, to the dialogue before they get to see what everyone else wrote. And so that can sort of keep that from happening, because I know it happens. It's natural. It's natural. And it tends to happen when it's a discussion question that has really one answer. And that's what we want to try to avoid, right? No one discussion board question should have one answer that you're looking for. It should be ambiguous. If not situational. I often see questions where it's, they watch a video and then they answer. And then you might have them take a stance on the video. You see it was a good video or a bad video. But put some situation, put a context to it, right? Say you are now this person in the video, or you are now this position. How do you address this problem? And sort of create a scenario for them. Could also be very beneficial. And to also think, I know some of you have attended our Collaborate Ultra session. That could be a great place to have a discussion. Students can talk back and forth with you, and then that's a place where we can actually implement some of this methodology of the Harkness method. And I don't want to say too much about it, but I know that there's currently a pilot process with training for our on-campus faculty. And I think it's just a few hand-selected faculty members have been able to go through it. But hopefully if it opens up and it's successful, it should be something that will be available to all of you in the coming years. So something to think about. I did kind of want to share a little bit of the video just because I think it kind of, I wanted to get, let's see here. Well, maybe I don't have the video here. Oh, it's right at the top. Just to see if it gets anything going in your mind. And I want to know towards the end of our session here if there's any problems that you see might happen trying to implement this methodology in an online format. I definitely like to hear it because obviously you guys teach online, you get exposed to it every day. So if you can. Yeah. And that was the quote that I chose to begin the session.
Revelation, it talks about how there was a long period of time where he did not get anything from God.
More attention that allowed him to use his like poetic skills to actually convey his message.
But are these his words? Why is it that she says your Lord must have come to hate you?
Well, I think it's because they took him to waterfall right after the revelation.
So he must have been really frustrated, ashamed in a sense that he was associated with these people that he thought were charlatans.
It's kind of exhilarating in a sense. As you become more familiar with darkness, you come to realize that learning from others rather than just one person or from yourself allows your mind to be able to explore rather than just accept.
Nearly every case, yes. The students around the table are all teaching each other all the time. Wow, right, that's a lot to ask. But at the same point, if you put good people together, amazing things happen.
In all honesty, I remember going home and being like, I don't know how I can do math like this. You kind of get excited. Our teacher had given us the tools, but then like we were actually the ones who found the answer.
I didn't go to a school like this. I had great teachers, so don't get me wrong. Absorbed, read all this stuff, and spit it right back out exactly the way they wanted me to, and then 6 months later, nothing. That's not actually why I'm here. I'm not an expert trying to teach you what happened in the past. I'm here to try to foster an environment where we're going to sort this out together.
It's in the silences where you find points of reflection, where that process starts to develop and you start to unpack a little bit more of who you are.
The table's made out of wood. It brings us all together. We're all facing somebody, so you have to make eye contact with someone, you have to talk to someone. I gained the skill of listening, truly listening to somebody.
I have Mr. Aaron, and we're doing creative writing. And dude, one of the funniest exercises we did the other day was we were doing this fact or fiction exercise.
Alright. Okay, so yeah, that makes sense. That's what we were 5 to 5, yeah. Oh my god, this is so cool. You have to show this to your math class. I'll show it to my math class. This is exciting.
And so we basically just put this rod through the magnet one, just like floated through, and it was like, what?
I think Harkness just works. Harkness works in any class, in any subject. It's more important to learn than just get something right.
Thank you. And obviously they showed a lot of elements of that face-to-face interaction that we're also well known for. And the professors here, I know you guys are liberal arts professors, and I think it goes to, I think it comes natural to you to have those sorts of discussions in your classrooms, because the subjects lend itself to having more discussion. I know because I studied in the liberal arts and religious studies myself, and it allowed me to get that perspective. I had a personal relationship with my professors, and I think this can be achieved online, right? I think if we just think about it more consciously, understanding that we might have to engage a little bit more than we're typically used to in the online modality, that this can be achieved, right? Just through Collaborate Ultra. Imagine having a class and you can see your students, they can all have video cameras showing them, and you can have these discussions, you can start posing questions within your subject matter, and this can happen right now within an online classroom. So just something to think about. It's something that's going to be implemented in our face-to-face classrooms here. I want to see it implemented in our online classrooms as well. Just a different way of thinking about discussion boards. It's not about the points. It's not about the grade. And hopefully we can help students understand that. It's really about understanding your perspective and where you're coming from and sharing your story. With that, I think I've set a good foundation. We're going to get a little bit into specifics as far as questioning and specific examples of we have using videos that hopefully will be beneficial to you. So,
hi, I'm Ariella. I just wanted to talk to you guys about the different aspects you want to consider when you are creating your questions for a discussion board. So for the first one, let me get this marker. So it's going to be, what do you want your students to know? What kind of thinking do you want to promote with your questions? So there are 3 different types of thinking. One is convergent thinking, where you ask your student, okay, it's based off of what do you want your students to recall, or be able to recite this information. So these kind of questions usually involve why or how. An example of that would be, how did the detective, or why did the detective arrest the mother in the case? So these kind of questions you want to stray away from for this discussion boards because they don't really promote conversation. It's best utilized with your written assignments, your exams, and your quizzes. So I'm just going to block this one off here. So the next two ways of thinking are the ones that we want to actually promote, which are divergent thinking and evaluative thinking. Evaluative. Okay, so for divergent thinking, it's where you have your students show their creativity through their responses. So an example of that, just to give you a short scenario, would be, let's say in a story you have these two friends, they've been friends since childhood, and their names are John and Paul. And John tells Paul, like, hey, I'm going to go and rob a store in a couple of days. A question that could come from that scenario is, if, say that there's the night before the robbery, John comes up to Paul for advice. How would you go about dissuading Paul to commit the crime, from committing the crime? So for evaluative, it focuses more on having your students being able to defend and justify their reasoning or their points of view. So these are best served for your debate questions. So an example of that would be focusing on the context of Macbeth. It could be, was Macbeth's descent into evil a matter of free will or fate? And what you could do is you can divide the students into two groups, A and B. One side is going to be for fate, the other side is going to be for free will. And you can have them have discussion. Through that, they could learn from each other and consider different perspectives that they wouldn't have considered otherwise. So the second aspect you guys want to focus on when you're doing your questions is, how are the students going to be able to connect what they're learning to the real world? Because the adult theorist called Malcolm Knowles, he found that education or knowledge is more meaningful for students when they're able to draw upon their past experiences, or if they're able to relate it to the current experiences. So a great example of that would be if you guys were to do a case study with your discussion questions. So I took a freedom of expression class when I was going to the University of Miami. And the way that my professor would do his exams, he'd present a case study at the end of each one of them, where he present a scenario where, let's just say there's a guy and he's, this class is mainly focused on First Amendment rights. So there'd be a guy in a neighborhood with Nazi memorabilia, and he's talking to a group of people, inciting, he's using hate speech in his way of presenting. And he called for people in that crowd to take action against a minority of people. So he would have us, he'd give us the role of a judge, and we'd have to determine if his type of speech was protected or not, and then back it up with why in the different case examples that we have in the past, like you could use Brandenburg versus Ohio to back up your reasoning. So that would be a great example of how students could see how their knowledge could be used in a real world example. And so finally, I want to talk to you guys about open-ended and closed-ended questions. So you never want to use a closed-ended question where a student can just answer yes or no, and that could be it. Because with that, you're not going to get a conversation, you're not going to get a discussion. So you want to go for more open-ended questions. So for example, instead of just asking your students, oh, did you see the episode of Law & Order SVU last night? You want to ask them, what was the most shocking aspect of last night's episode? And from that, if you want to promote even further discussion, you could, if the student answers, oh, the most shocking aspect of last night's episode was when Detective Elliott used excessive force with the criminal and complicated the case even further. You could follow up with that response and say, how would you go about handling the situation differently? What would you do? And from that, you can kind of get this discussion between different students and their points of views and all that. So just to wrap it up, first, consider what your students want to know. Second, tell them how they can relate the experiences to real life. And 3, go with open-ended questions, not closed-ended questions. So I'm going to present it over to Ron, who's going to talk to you guys about using different videos to make your discussions more dynamic.
Thank you, Ariella. Just like she started touching on the point of, did you see last night's episode of SUE, and can you answer these questions? Well, I actually want to show you some examples of some courses that we have that have put some of those ideas and thoughts into practice. So make sure I pull up the right one here first. Actually, I'm going to go with this one first. This is a English course that was taught just recently over the summer. It's running right now in the fall as well, but I don't like to bring up a live course for the examples because it's going on. But this course was taught over the summer, and students, when they sign up for these courses and you get your discussion boards, they like to see, and you would like to provide them with options. And options, what I mean is, like, the professor provides option 1. You know, you can actually respond to the discussion board question with your phone or camera, and that's how you can post your response. Alternatively, they give you option 2. You could write one out. Some students maybe aren't comfortable in front of the camera. Maybe they just feel like they respond better by writing. But the point is, the professor put the same question out there, and you have the ability to answer it in multiple ways, either using multimedia, using just a text version of it. So, for example, right here, I'm going to go into the actual discussion board question that the students responded in. Give it a second here while it loads. Here we go. And I know that Luis Rivera here, for example, he decided to use a video. So the question was posted to him, and he decided to, you know what, I will. So this is kind of like a version of what your post would look like on video. When a student uploads it, you just literally be able to click it right in there. I'll play for a second.
Hey guys, this is Louis. Because of the rain, I'm doing this video here in my car. But I wanted to talk about this as a place in Color Ridge or Color Bay, whatever you want to call it, called Black Point Marina. It's been around since roughly the 70s, but it didn't get accepted until the 90s. I have been coming here for about the last 15 years. There's a lot of stuff to do that you can do here. Not a lot of people, unless you're from Kendall South, know about this place. But if I want to show you, there is a park here. You can do biking, you can do barbecue, you know, bring your family. Usually on the weekends it's very busy, of course.
Alright, so I'm not going to play the entire video for you, but it gives you an idea. Basically, the question posed to the student that the professor posed was, you know, describe an area in Miami that you feel is so Miami and how you would interpret it. And this student felt his best way of describing it is like, you know what, Black Point Marina. This is a very popular area. Now, he could have easily written that out, but he felt comfortable because he was actually in the parking lot. He happened to be visiting the restaurant, and he took the time to go ahead, you know what, let me film this, I could upload it, and you're responding to it, and you could bring up that creative side of the students to engage in. And students could turn around and they could respond with either a video post themselves, responding to this post, or they could actually type it in as well. So it's good to know that they have those options. So, you know, if you have questions out there in your personal discussion boards that you want us to review with you, you can set up a time that, you know, we can sit down with you, we can review your questions. Maybe we can modify them to include these options of having video or video responses. Now, alternatively, sometimes, like I was saying before, not everyone may be comfortable with the camera. So I'm using this example of this second course, also taught that went over the summer, which is a sports facilities and event management course, KIN 206, taught in summer A. And the reason I bring this one up because this is the discussion board itself here. So the professor brings up in module 1 discussion question 1, you know, many of you have played sports growing up, consider your experiences and the amount of money that was spent to support your athletic careers. This is one of the fastest growing segments of sports. Now, the idea and concept of using video now is kind of flipped because it's not the professor posting a video about what the assignment or discussion question is going to be. It's more along the lines like, I'm going to post a video. So the video is actually hyperlinked. I'll play it for just a second to get the idea.
It has become the modern American family pastime, traveling the country to compete in youth sports. So many families are doing it these days that a brand new industry is emerging across the country. An industry designed to cater to their obsession and lighten their wallets.
It's 5 a.m. on a summer morning.
It's time to get up. Brush your teeth.
But at this home in Northern Virginia, it's time to wake up and get going.
We got a boogie, babe. Let's go.
Angie Coe and her family are packing to leave town.
Now, I'm gonna pause it right there for you. Well, the interesting part is, obviously they put in a link for the videos to go ahead and go watch it. But in addition, they went ahead and put an article in as well, so we linked it. And we won't go into detail into the specific article, but the point is that you're providing multiple forms, that you have your video instead of just having a post of yourself or the student responding in a post. You're sending the student out there and going, listen, go out here and read this article that pertains to this. Also, go ahead and watch this video pertaining to this discussion board question. And then at the bottom, we go ahead and answer the following questions. Very clearly in detail spelled for them, so they have an idea of what they need to do. And they're open-ended questions that jars the student's mind to think about, how could I go ahead and answer it? It's not just a simple yes or no, black and white. It's very engaging in the fact that I went out, everyone's gonna interpret that video when they watch it in a different way. Everyone's gonna interpret the meaning of the article and what they gain from it in a different way. So that's a good way to incorporate two different parts of media and including video in your discussion board without having the students or yourself to go out there and film themselves and upload it. So we can help you guys out if you have examples of things like that. If you want to sit down with us, you can always make an appointment. Now, a little promotion here. If you are interested in making a nice video of yourself in a discussion board, Byron could set up a date and time that he could go out there and meet you anywhere on campus, maybe your office, wherever you'd like, and he could definitely do that for you because he could do a nice video. You could pose the questions, the open-ended questions to your students, and he'll be able to edit them, and then we'll include them in and embed them into your course itself. With that being said, one of the most interesting things and this is, I believe Professor Ibaka had brought it up earlier, what can we do to make sure students aren't just reading everybody else's answers? And one of the things we like to do is, like, when we go into the options setting within edit the forum within the discussion question itself, right there on forum settings right here when I'm circling around, participants must create a thread in order to view other threads in this forum. So we click on that, and we highly suggest that if your courses are set up in a way that are not, and they're just in standard view, we could go in there if you'd like and just let us know. We could go click that option for you and we would hit submit. And basically, like, it pretty much says what it says. Students can't just go ahead and read the discussion board answers to everybody else and be like, well, that sounds pretty well accurate. I'll just change a couple words and that's what I'm going to respond to. They're going to have to come up with something unique and actually go in there and answer it because they're not going to see everybody else's answers or the thread. So just a couple of things to just throw out there for you. Videos of having them post to themselves or you providing links. It's just the idea and the tool of having that. Yes?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, a great mechanism. I would want to use it. After their first entry, let's say they post something, then they have access to what other people have posted.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that applies to every single question. It's not like you just posted module 1 and then you can see the rest of the semester. It's every module that wherever there's a discussion board question, they have to participate and submit an answer in order to see everybody else's responses.
Cool.
So, like I said, I open up the floor at this point because those are the 3 things that they want to cover with you guys. If you have any questions, if you want any follow-up, please.
Yeah, and let's open it up in the spirit of discussions and discussion boards. Let's open up to hear some experiences and maybe you have some horror stories that you want to share with us about discussion. Like, typically, what is the level of quality that you find in your discussion boards? Is it a high level, low level? Does it depend?
I found the quality to be good, but I had always wondered about certain, because you have a situation where somebody is missing in action for some time, and then all of a sudden, the person tries to cover a couple of, and you realize that the answers could have been gleaned from that. Is what I've always wondered about.
Yes.
The person who doesn't have time and
Yeah.
who is busy and, so that feature will be very
Helpful.
very helpful.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Do these
Yes.
discussions? Oh, go ahead, Ed.
The other question has to do with, the topic I teach is very historical. So there are poems, there are videos, but from time to time, when it's time to use it, the video is not there because it's old. The video is not there, and so it makes it a little problematic. And I'm not sure what. Do I have to email and say, we can't find this video? And
If there's like an issue, like let's just say for example, there's a YouTube video that you
Yeah.
were using and you were basing your discussion board
Yes.
question on it. Unfortunately, when it's like an external YouTube video like that, they do tend to expire. Unfortunately, we don't know when it's gonna happen. It's just gonna happen overnight. We've unfortunately had that happen to us.
Okay.
Day before classes started, we've had a
Yeah.
page disappear. But what we like to do is like, and Ariel and I, all of us we do is like, before courses go live, we kind of like preview them. We kind of skim through them to make sure, you know, videos are working, links are proper. But anytime that a video or a link, anything like that becomes broken, it's not available, just let us know right away. You can respond to our email to let us know, and you can include right away the link. And we'll get, if it's a YouTube video, we'll go to YouTube and get the embedded video, and we'll put it back into the course to update, because that's an ongoing process. It's part of like the life cycle of the we can't just rely on like just carrying the material over. We always have to stay on top of the material and keep it fresh, because sometimes it does expire.
Absolutely, things update. So it's just the natural course of things sometimes with online courses. But definitely let us know, and we'll do our best to update that link. If not the exact same video, it's something closely related.
We have a DLI help desk email. I'm sure if you guys are familiar with it. And that email is not just like me, like we all get it.
Yeah.
So like if I'm out or Luis is out, you know, she could update it, he could update it, because we all get that email. So it's kind of like we're all on the same level, and we just go in there and take a look at it. We maintain it on a daily basis.
I used one or two discussion boards my first time through, which was really a beginner's time. And do you normally post a limit to a time frame for the discussion? Everybody needs to have, this discussion opens today, and people need to have contributed by such and such a time, right?
Yeah, we have that set up in some courses. It's obviously at the professor's discretion of whether or not we set it. But our default, right? Our default tends to be leaving it open, right? Because if it's a true discussion board, it should be ongoing. There might be something that the student wants to reference, maybe for a project that they're working on that was on the discussion board. They want to see those kind of comments to sort of back whatever assignment up.
Right, see that as a part of a record, but then do you close off, or do some people just leave that discussion board open through the end of the course so that people are adding things? In such cases, you need to be reminding students, right, that remember our discussion board is open, so when you're in Module 4, remember you may want to check the discussion board from Module 1 because things might have been added, right?
Yes.
Or you can just say this discussion is going to close at this point, if you feel that. Because I was wondering if you're trying to get everybody to participate and you have an open discussion board and what am I going to say? Nothing to nudge them to contribute within a reasonable length of time. You have people who just might kind of put it off. So sometimes there's a benefit in saying
only open from this time to this time.
So get your comment.
And you know, and I understand again that we set it up that way. If the professor wants each module to be set up, or each discussion module be set up so it's only open for a few days, and so that the discussion has to happen within those few days. But like I said, our default tends to be just leaving it open so that people can reference it, come back to it, add to it.
Is there? Oh, go ahead.
So I guess sometimes we got to get creative as far as what is that carrot on the stick, right? For students to actually respond to that. Hopefully it's a little bit of the grade, but maybe it's engaging enough of a discussion post question, right? It's relevant enough, it's debatable enough that it forces them to, oh, I really want to comment on that. That's an interest. Or I have an opinion, I want to share that. You know, because we do that, right? We do that on social media. I mean, you go on platforms like Facebook. Fortunately, I don't have any social media, but if I did, you go on it and immediately something, whether it's a flag or Confederate, whatever it is, people comment on it. You know, gun rights. You know, shooting happens. Everyone wants to share comments about it. So there's a lot of these moments, right, that are happening currently in our history. I guess it's up to you, the experts, professors, how can you make those connections, right, of current events with your particular topic. But I think we have to embrace that. I think if the question's engaging enough and is debatable enough, I think coupled with the grade, right, of participation to that discussion board, I think that would suffice as far as carrot on the stick to force them to add their opinion to to that discussion
Yeah,
board.
you don't want to be punitive, but you would like within a certain time frame everybody to be participating instead of having 3 people who just say, well, this thing's going to be open
I agree.
sometime later on, because then you're losing their engagement at
Yes.
that moment. Can you ever have a discussion that closes at a point, but then the record of that discussion is open for people to review?
So what we will do there is have a due date. So what we can do in the discussion board is there could be a due date, but it doesn't open or close the discussion board at all. But it lets you know if someone has added a thread late. So
Okay, yeah,
so,
well, no, then you have enough of an incentive for people not.
exactly.
People get busy and don't do things, and then you've lost them.
Mhm.
But if you have a due date, you know that they're gonna have an incentive, grade-wise and otherwise, to actually
Yes.
participate at the current moment when the discussion is most centered. But then it could be left open for people to refer to
Yes.
Later on. No,
And,
that's fine.
and add on. I think that's a good compromise of trying to, alleviate that situation.
You
Yeah,
can do a
well-
due date like we were mentioning earlier, and it'll stay open. Students can respond, like I say, like the last day of the modules open is, or technically the new one starts on Monday, so Sunday would be the last day. If they happen to respond Monday, Tuesday, or the previous module, they'll still have the ability to respond, and the threads will be
It'll just
created.
be a post-
It'll just say it'll come
Oh,
to
well,
you on a
that's
record.
useful, because then you can have it, just as if somebody turns in a paper late, you
Yeah.
can say,
Yeah.
well, but, no, that's helpful, to know. The other thing is, I was gonna say, you want, it's good to be able to leave it, because actually, I may wanna have a discussion post. When I do the course on revolutions, I might wanna have a discussion post later on where I'm asking them to compare what happened in the revolution in France that brought us Les Mis, the
Yeah.
musical. There's some great stuff you can do from Les Mis. But Les Mis wasn't about the French Revolution. It was actually about a later, smaller revolution. But you might want them to compare, and if we had a discussion board on the Great Revolution of 1789, then they're looking at this one, they're looking at things from Les Mis. You could say, remember, there was stuff about this that we discussed, they can actually go back to the discussion board if it's still hanging out there for them to refer to. And you're saying that's.
Yep, that's doable. It's
That's doable.
completely
Okay.
doable. We just set the date up according to the semester as it plays out, either fall, spring, or summer.
Yeah.
And we just put those due dates. A lot of professors tend to go with closing Sunday at 11:59 p.m. The new one would start like 12:01 a.m., which is technically
Yeah, I
Monday.
think that's what I did the first time.
Yeah,
Through
and
those-
we would go with that. And one of the things you could use is your announcements page. You can send quick announcements to the entire class, and some professors have used in the past, and it's completely up to you. But some professors would be like, all right, on a Monday, welcome guys to Module 3. This week we're going to be covering the following. I want to remind you that your first post, you should make your first post on this week's discussion board by Wednesday. So then everyone
Yeah.
gets in and already participates in the discussion board question. And please, do your follow-up to your students by Sunday before it closes. So then it gives them that opportunity of like having a date of like
Yeah.
Wednesday and a Sunday
Do
to
any
be able to
people-
participate in the
Yeah, do
discussion
any of
board.
the people who are teaching right now do something in which they say, for example, if you have this system where until you post, you can't see the other posts. So you post, all
Correct.
the other posts are there.
Yeah.
Then say, I want you to also write at least one follow-up post. You can't, if I want to say, without
So, like,
being too
to your
constrictive,
peers.
I prefer that you not abandon the discussion after your first post, but
Yeah.
at least do at least one follow-up and
Yeah.
comment on another post. That, again, that's a requirement, but it's not meant to be restrictive. What it is trying to do is keep them involved in the discussion.
Yep.
So, I mean,
We
that's just
definitely
a matter of
can't
what
add
I'm
those
expecting
to
in
Yeah.
the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about 50-50 as far as how many, I think more often than not, they do require you to respond to students, and they add that requirement just so that it forces students to have a discussion.
Mhm.
And I believe if we can go in settings real quick, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
Ron, I think there might be a setting, if I remember correctly. Let's keep scrolling down. Subscribe, create, edit, allow tagging.
Due date right here.
Oh, yeah, see that?
So here, this show participants and needs grading status after every 3 posts. So that, that means, because they I think in this course, they have to respond to 2 of their classmates. So having that needs grading only shows up with 3 means that they don't even show up on your grading until they at least post their initial time, which is the first time, and then 2 more times
Okay.
somewhere
No,
else.
that's
So that's a
good.
setting that you can add as well that sort of cleans it up on your end in the grading process to make sure that you're only getting students who have actually responded to somebody.
Right.
So I did want to show that because
No,
that's
that's useful to know.
absolutely. Any other comments, stories? I mean, I think we do have this problem, right, with discussion boards where it sort of feels forced. Sometimes, like, students don't really make great comments. I don't know, what is the status of the comments that students tend to make in the discussion boards? Is it?
They tend to be, at least in my course, they tend to be overly agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to challenge each other. So one person says something, everybody, oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, yeah. I'm guilty of it as a grad student. I think I've done, obviously elaborated more than that was a great post.
Yeah.
And maybe what we can think about doing, right, as a requirement, is any comment you make on a post, you have to contradict that person. I'm just throwing that out there. What if, right? You even if you agree, you have to always come up with a counterpoint to a person. That's the only response that you have available when you're responding to something, is you have to take the other stance. So maybe setting that as the question, as the response, might fix that situation of always being agreeable, because I think our default, right, is we want to be positive to other people. We want to make sure that they feel good, and so that they respond to us in a positive fashion. But you're right, that's not really a discussion. That's not really creating anything, and that's not constructive. And I think if you just put constructive feedback, they'd still by default kind of lean positive in their feedback. Maybe if we create that sort of antithesis, like you have to have the anti-stance of who you're responding to, even if you don't, maybe that might be a way to get a little bit more, maybe the discussion board will get interesting. I don't know. I haven't seen that before in an online course, but that might be a way to fix that particular problem or issue. Yeah, worth exploring.
I've used that in a more conventional class format, which is, you must disagree, and actually I think it disarms people a little bit, because then they don't have to feel someone else is taking it personally if they disagree. Remember, we all have to disagree. It's one of the assignments. So after class you can say, I hope I didn't hurt your feelings, but I've got to disagree.
Yeah. And
it actually, I think, diffuses the situation. And the online course, I did have 1 or 2 discussion posts because I was really a beginner with all this. I guess this is true of all classes. My experience was that it was mixed, which is what you always get. You have some students who take it quite seriously and actually write a very good post. And then you'll have a few students who clearly, for whatever reason, they're trying to get by. It'll be a quick comment. And then the key is to see if you could nudge the I'm just getting by student to do a little bit more. But I've had some students who will disagree. They seem to know how to disagree. And they'll mixed disagree. I think this point you made is very good, but I don't see point 2 the same way you do, and then you could get something that's fruitful out of it.
And I want to promote different aspects of discussion, right? Don't think that only discussion boards are the only place to have discussion. Blogs is one of the, if you were here for our last session, blogs is one of the least utilized applications within the Blackboard system, but blogs forces you to talk about your experience and how you connect to the class, and is public to the rest of the class, and can be a great way to elaborate a discussion. So like post a blog and then respond to another person's blog and have them share stories connected to your topic or connected to your subject or connected to that particular module. Might be a great way to go about it. And I can't speak enough because I know for a fact, right, that we tend to enjoy that interaction, that valuable face-to-face interaction. Take advantage of the Collaborate Ultra tool that we would be more than happy to go through again on a one-on-one basis, and have that be a stage for a discussion. Say, hey, I'm going to meet on Wednesday at 7 p.m. in the online room. If you want to have a discussion on this, you'll get extra credit, or whatever, however you want to phrase it, right? It could be voluntary, it could be mandatory. Let's have a discussion and have students video web conference you into that room and have a dialogue back and forth, and utilize that as another alternative. Don't look at the discussion board as the only option, right, of having a discussion. Use Collaborate Ultra, use blogs, maybe use a Google Doc even, you know, where people are writing out real-time ideas, and it's a collaborative project, things of that nature. I think what's the value, right? What are we trying to achieve with discussion boards? Is it a grade? I think ultimately what we want is for people to learn from others and think differently about their own perspectives. So I think we have to keep that in mind of what are we really trying to achieve with these discussion board questions.
Yeah, question in that regard.
Yeah.
With the collaborate idea, even if you're doing a class session with Skype or whatever, the one hurdle that you do get, it's obviously, is you are giving this opportunity at a specific time, which means that the students have to participate at that time, and it runs a little bit against the online idea of people
Absolutely.
coming. So that has to be negotiated. I'm not saying it can't, but I think if you do it, my concern always is I have to figure out how to handle the grading and measurement of this. If there's a student who can't participate because of a legitimate conflict, then you have to find an alternative to this one session when everybody's collaborating, right?
And what I see often is you record the session, right? So students who might, for whatever reason, work, family, could not make it to your discussion, make it to your session, can view the recording. And now add a caveat to that. Maybe any student who did not attend will then have to post in the discussion board after reviewing the recording their point or their point of view. And that way everyone participates. The one who have to come in afterwards, and then the ones who are there live are obviously participating and will get the grade. So that might be a good compromise to take care of that. Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it in other classes. That's how they deal with it, right? I want to say that students, even though this online can be viewed as an asynchronous format, you know, you go at your pace, at your time, whenever you can, people still want synchronous interactivity. They want to see your face. They want to be able to ask you questions, and they want that element, whether it's coming to campus or doing other things. You know, if you have an event, for instance, I do want to recommend this. If you have an event on campus or a lecture series, invite those online students. Even if they're far and they don't show up, the fact that they're being considered and you consider them to join you in that discussion is valuable. So I definitely want to recommend that. But that's a way to compromise the collaborative.
One comment I was going to make, Edmund, because Ed and I are both historians of sorts, so my preference always is, well, this runs a little counter to what we've been saying, but there's an old aphorism that pooled ignorance is still ignorance. And one of the things you don't want to be doing in an online course is pooling ignorance, but that's a little overstated, but it's a very traditional thing. Because it isn't ignorance if you're coming out of your own experience, but if you're a historian dealing with a specific issue, I really prefer that discussions, it's predicated on something. There's either a video or there's a text that students have been expected to read, so that they're bringing that to there's sort of a certain measure of knowledge base which then they can filter through their own experience and comment. I found in the couple that I did that worked best. If I said, look, the focus here is going to be Robespierre, the leader of the French Revolution, the man of the guillotine, right? But have them have something, even if it's as simple as reading the Wikipedia article on Robespierre, so they come with some, because some people don't even know who he is, and they come with some knowledge of that they can then interpret, and then there is it doesn't always have to be that way, but there is maybe a common text or two or a common video or two that unites them. I found in not every field, but for my field, that works best.
Yeah, and that's the role that I think Harkness and discussion-based learning is trying to promote, right? As you, the professor, you, the expert, you're providing those contexts. You're providing the context in which they can then have that discussion and talk about your particular subject matter. And I want to point out that even in the video, right, even though the students were guiding the discussion, they had a text that they were looking at.
They had a shared text.
They had a shared problem, or if it's in the math class, it's always you provide that shared context that then people branch out and form opinions and talk about experiences. So yes, that's absolutely your role, and I think it's absolutely essential to have a good discussion. Is you yourself have to figure out, well, what is this discussion that we're about to have? What is it grounded on? What are we going to talk about? Unfortunately, I don't think we're at the level where we can not do that, right? Where we can just meet on a collaborate session and not really have a context of what we're going to talk about and what we're going to debate. So I definitely recommend having, whether it's a text, a person, a math problem that you will be talking about and discussing.
Yeah. Let me run, I don't mean to, Edmund, I don't mean to own the stage here if you want to jump in. But that's why actually I felt the first time I did this, I took one thing from more traditional courses, and in a history course, I actually had just simple quizzes, because there's a certain, that isn't the only thing they were graded on, but I wanted them to do that because there is a certain amount of what you call factual information that's very valuable when the student begins discussions. And if you start to get into what you really want the students to do, critically analyze, compare, and so on like that, if over the earlier modules they've built up a certain cadre of factual information, then they find it much easier to start comparing. If there's some, and a quiz isn't maybe the best way to do it, but it's one way. Yeah. For example, if you say, the big thing about the French Revolution is they actually executed the king. But we earlier talked about and so people say, oh my God, it's the first time a king was ever executed. Well, it wasn't. Actually, in the English Revolution, a century before, they executed a king in a very different revolution. Now, those are nitty-gritty pieces of factual information, but when people know that, you say, well, what was the circumstance of the one, and what was the circumstances of the other? And then they begin to understand, well, these are two revolutions, but they really were very different in certain ways. That's when I feel students are really gaining historical understanding, because they're grabbing onto factual information that they've made a part of their memory and then can build on it.
And absolutely, and I don't want to focus on the sense that this is the only type of assignment you should have. Variety is key, and like you alluded to, it's a matter of scaffolding them.
Yeah.
Where they have to build up. Maybe the discussion happens towards the end of your semester when they've built up a certain level of knowledge and information. That way they can have an informed conversation about the topic or the subject. So definitely a great example. I think that's very important. I'm never anti-quiz, but I am anti-one element, right? If it's just one, tests are the only things in your class, or even discussions are the only thing in your class. I think we have to add that variety for students so that they can engage with the content in different ways. Yeah. So a great example.
Complaint is too much work.
Yeah, too much. Well, it's hard, right? Education's hard, knowledge is hard.
And sometimes even when you do this, last we watched the video in class, Sarafina and the students were supposed to write a 2-page response. And this is to force them to think about it and write something before we actually discuss. They still go to class and some people don't want to talk. And so anyway, that's another story.
And I think it's funny, right? We had talked earlier in this, when this session began, about the Harvard current scandal that's going on with the admissions, and how Dan, you mentioned that this Philip Exeter Academy is one of the academies that has like reserve spots, essentially within Harvard.
And you wonder, they're claiming they aren't really reserved, but it is an issue. Are they in fact reserved?
And you wonder why. I think students, myself included, who has gone through public school education, they don't teach us like this. They don't ask us questions. They don't ask us, hey, what do you want to learn today? Those questions were never posed to me as a student. So when we get college students or we get adult learners who learned similar to how I have, you're presented with a discussion question or a moment to discuss, you get nervous because how much practice have you had? But you get a group of these students in your classroom, I'm sure they would have no problem starting a discussion. And so it's not just our fault or our issue, but I guess we have to have a little patience in understanding that, you know, our education system doesn't fit this model. And sometimes doesn't fit the university model as is. You know, these students are coming in from public schools or different schools that aren't being engaged with, you know, you have to have your own curiosity, right? You have to motivate yourself. Your job as the professor isn't to motivate students necessarily. They have to motivate themselves. They have to want to learn that subject and understand that maybe I'm taking an elective in religion, or maybe I'm taking an elective in math. What does that have to do with my major? Well, it could have a lot to do with your major, but we don't allow students to think that way. We think we force them to think that every subject is separate, that you're a historian, you're a mathematician, you're a scientist, your subjects aren't related. And it's quite the contrary, right? All of it is related. So it's a form of thinking. And so hopefully the more exposure we give to them, right? If your class, they have to discuss, and in your class they have to discuss, and in your class they have to discuss, well then they can't say they're not used to it, right? So I think it's up to us as well to try to create that environment, but understanding that we have a long way to go. And you know, sometimes students aren't ready for the caliber of new knowledge that needs to be developed at the university level. So patience, exposure, and interest, and relating it to current events, I think can really go a long way with making it valuable. So, any other questions, comments? And I did want to, Professor, I think, is this the first time you're coming to our workshop?
Yep.
Your name, sir?
I'm Frank Foote.
Oh, Professor Foote. Okay, perfect. Perfect. I remember we support you. BGS. You have a couple of BGS courses.
PSY.